Well, thank you so much, Jorge. It's certainly given us a lot to think about on the real ROI, return on inclusion, and particularly given that, I'm excited to present to you this special fireside chat with Carolina Huaranca Mendoza. She's a scout at Lightspeed Ventures and has a very extensive background in this sector, having touched on really like all the different roles that you could possibly have. And so I'll let her introduce herself.
Well, Meghan, thank you so much for having me here, especially any event associated with Latin America and Peru warms my heart. So excited to be here and contribute to the ecosystem. My name is Carolina, and I think one of the most important things folks should know about me is that my parents are originally from Peru. My mom is from Arequipa. My father is from Lima. And they actually left Peru during a very challenging time during Sendero, and came and immigrated to the United States to start a completely new life. And I grew up in an interesting environment, predominantly all Jewish neighborhood. So it was a fascinating cultural experience, speaking Spanish, learning a new language. So it's given me a really interesting lens on how I see the world, having one foot in the US, but still very culturally connected in Latin America, but also growing up in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. So that has informed a lot of how I see my work in investing. That's on the personal side. And on the professional side, I am currently a scout for Lightspeed Venture Partners. We're a multi-stage venture fund that invests globally. We've started to make some recent investments in Latin America, which I'm super excited about. I know, and there will be more. I'm sure there's going to be another later stage announcement, but the first investment was a Series B company in Mexico, and I made an investment in a company called Colors at seed stage, also in Mexico. So hopefully we'll be able to do that throughout the region. But before that, I worked at a fund called Kapor Capital, which was started by Mitch Kapor, who was the founder of Lotus 123 before my time, but I'm sure maybe some folks on this may have used the platform before. But our whole focus was around investing in companies that were closing gaps of opportunity and access for low-income and diverse communities. And there, we published a lot of research around diversity and inclusion, very US-based, but I think having studied a lot of diversity and inclusion, I also had to learn a lot of this. You know, I think everybody is on a continuous learning path of what diversity and inclusion is. Happy to share all those learnings with you and the rest of the folks here today.
Thank you so much, Carolina. You've already touched on so many things. First of all, I just wanted to note, I think it's really funny. My dad is Jewish, my mom is Christian, and but I grew up in an area that where like there were actually a lot of Jewish people, but not in my neighborhood. So I think it's really funny that you grew up in kind of the opposite situation.
Oh my goodness, yeah, like bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and then inviting people to my quinceañera. So it was just a fascinating cultural mix, and one that I'm very proud to have had.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. So, you know, you mentioned like this is a journey. We're all on this journey, and I also just want to take that as an opportunity to say to people, you know, watching this today here with us, you know, we're all on this journey. We're all in different parts of our journey, and so, you know, there may be some things that we talk about that may be a little bit uncomfortable, and that is completely normal. And so I don't have all the answers by any means. You know, I've been going through this process of sort of unlearning and relearning, and so we're here to try and help facilitate like a next step in everyone's journey, including our own, I think, through this conversation. Yeah. So you know, talking about journey is sort of, how did you come to diversity and inclusion? Has it it sounds from your background like it's always been something that's sort of been present as an idea, but recently, and through your work at Kapor, you've really had a lot much more focus specifically on diversity and inclusion. And so I'm just curious, like, how did you get there?
So you make a great point, Megan. I think there is a lived experience of, and I will cite a few examples on, how I see myself sometimes is very different than how the world sees me, right? There are a handful of Latinas that are in my position of access, but I have been in rooms where people think I clean. And that actually happens quite regularly. So there are incidents and experiences that I've had because of the way I look, and people make perceptions about me, about my intelligence, and all things. I guess maybe I came in thinking, and especially my parents were like, it's America, just work hard, and things will be good. And sometimes you can work hard and opportunities are still not within your reach. And that was something that it took a lot of time for me to actually understand. So at Kapor, when I first walked in the door, one of the partners there has actually done tons of research, like 30 years worth of work on diversity and inclusion. I had no idea what terminologies were. Like, I did not understand this term of intersection, that because I'm a woman, I also have different identities about being the first person in my family to go to college and graduate, about being an immigrant, like all these different identities. So I think what Kapor did was give me a framework on how to talk about diversity and inclusion, but also recognize things that I didn't know myself. So that's why I think it's really important that this, even for myself, who identifies as a woman, who's Latina, who's first gen, who has all these, identities, still is working on these concepts herself. So this is not a race, it's a marathon. And I think a lot of people will get better for it. One thing that I do want to say that was a big eye opener for me is this concept of privilege, of me having privilege. And I never saw myself as someone that had privilege and power. Like, I think I recognized I had access, but I was on a panel a few years ago with Latinos and a lot of Latina immigrants, and someone said, "What is your privilege?" And in my head, I was like, well, I don't have any privilege. I went through all these experiences, and they're like, you have the privilege of having documentation and being in this country. And to me, it was the first time that I thought about that my parents, didn't have to, do what a lot of people are migrating or like crossing borders. No, they went through a path. Luckily at that time, the system was very, very different. So I'm very fortunate for it. But people who went to great schools didn't have opportunity and access because they didn't have residency or citizenship. So it was also looking within myself and being the reflection of, wow, I have privileges. And so that was really a lot of the beginning of the work for me. So that's why I keep honing in. This is something that you have to practice time and time again.
Yeah. I just want to reflect, I know when we talked about doing this, it was kind of like, we want this to be a conversation. So you said something that I just wanted to reflect on regarding sort of when you learning about intersectionality and when you started to notice and realize the connection of these different identities within yourself and what that meant. And last year, summer in the US, winter here in Peru, I was reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. And at one point, I'm reading it, and all of a sudden, I'm like, I had read it, I guess I was reading it earlier in the day, and I'm cooking in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I'm going like, oh my God, I have internalized anti-Semitism. Because he talks a lot in the book about some of the internalized racism, anti-Black racism that he has had and had to deal with through his life. And I'm going like, wow, Like
Well,
I didn't think that was going to be an outcome that I had from reading this book. I really read it because, one of my privileges is my white skin. And so, trying to sort of like part of my journey as an ally and improving with my allyship is doing some of this work and this reading. It had a really profound impact on me from that perspective as well. And so I think it's just another example of how this is a continual process.
no, for everybody.
Yeah. So you talk a great deal about systems thinking, Carolina. And so how has that impacted how you see or think about diversity and inclusion in tech and in venture capital?
So as a VC, my job is to identify the best. I invest very early, so at concept and at very early stage, seed stage. So my whole focus is on identifying founders that are going to build revolutionary companies and at the same time make me financial returns, right? With my goal of also doing good in the world. So when I think about the best founders and VCs also talk constantly, the VCs out here in the Valley are constantly talking about, wow, that founder, great systems thinker. It's like something you say again and again, and like, when you see it. So systems thinking basically is looking at a system or a platform holistically and understanding how all the different parts interact. You take one thing out, what happens to the rest of the system? You add an extra piece, what happens, right? And the best founders, like you can think of, actually not my favorite, but I admire him for the work, like Elon Musk, right? He's constantly thinking not of building a car, but thinking of the entire grid, right? Or with solar system, with solar panels and like traveling to Mars. But he's constantly thinking about these systems and then building things as interventions in these systems, right? And I would say that is a quality of some of the best entrepreneurs by far in the world. So I started to take a step back, especially when everything was happening in the United States around Black Lives Matter, with COVID, in terms of who were the people that were being most impacted and dying from it. They tended to be low-income people from minority groups, right? And it was a big forcing function to me to think about, wait, what systems? Like, think of it as a VC, because VCs are, again, always thinking about systems. Best founders are systems thinkers. What systems are in place that created this to be okay, or this to happen? And then I started thinking about structures, and I said, wait, the way the system was set up, the structures of policy, of political mandates, legislation, systems were set up so certain people cannot succeed. And that is a very difficult kind of moment for me. But if I'm thinking as a rational VC, that was what I started to see. So I'll give a perfect example of a system flaw. So when my parents first came to the United States, my dad went to San Marcos. So if there are any people from San Marcos, shout out. He and my mom actually were very intentional about where they would live. So I mentioned I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. Because they could have easily gone to Miami. But education was very important for them. So when they came, they actually went to a public library and they discovered something, that where you lived, what postal code you lived, the higher property taxes you paid. And because of the higher property taxes, your school system was a better school system. So at that time, they couldn't afford a house, but they identified these particular zip codes. And then my parents chose jobs, and they didn't have a car when they first came to this country, and a bus line that would be and renting a home in a zip code, literally right on the border, so I could have a great public school education. That decision changed my entire life. If they had just said, oh, maybe we can live in this area, and not thought about the system of how zip codes are set up and how taxes influence the quality of your school, I think my life would have been very different. I went to a school that was a factory for Stanford and Harvard and Wharton, and like I've been to those schools. So that also was me as a VC now. I didn't really understand that was a system, but I'm like, wow, the system right there was set up. If you didn't know that information, you would have made a different choice on where you lived, and the quality of my school would have been different. And the access then to teachers would have been different. Relegated to lesser schools, probably relegated, not going to an elite university. And this was public school access, right? It's not private school. So I say that because when I think about racism, right? I don't think about it as an individual thing. I think about it as a structural thing. Laws, policies, systems were set up for certain people not to succeed. And that is a very difficult thing for people to internalize. But when I started using this framework and thinking, wow, the zip code is a perfect example, then I started seeing so many other systems. Because if you think about it, like, who were the people who set up the systems? People who owned slaves. They did not consider those people to be humans. Is it likely that they probably set up policies, structures, constitutions, and systems not to be inclusive of those people's rights? Highly likely.
Yeah, highly. In fact, there's the famous three-fifths compromise. Yeah, most definitely. And still to this day in the U.S., right? Like in the Constitution, Black people, African-American people are considered 3/5 of a person. And we still have laws in the U.S. that are based upon that calculation. So, yeah. I think although it's an interesting, actually, living in Latin America, for me, being from the U.S., it's very clear to me that there is racism in the U.S. But it's been very interesting over the last year to watch from the outside as people looking at the U.S. as this idealized country that we see in Hollywood, and we see what they want us to think, right? Kind of going, oh, wow, yeah, there's racism in the U.S. Like I hadn't, people hadn't thought about that before. So I'd say that at this point, we clearly know that there's racism, a lot of racism in the U.S. But what about Latin America? There are those who would say that there is no racism in Latin America, only classism. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting and a very thoughtful and powerful question, right? And I think I'm going to say things that people may not agree with. So I remember asking my cousin this very same question, and they're like, no, we're all, like, because my family's Peruvian, we're all Peruvian. Everybody's the same. Like, no one, we don't have, this is a very US issue. And it was interesting to me because I remember going to an event for my business school before I went to the school. And I walked into, I think it was the Marriott in Miraflores. And I looked around and, it's very rare. I usually end up being one of the few women, also one of the few Latinos. But when I was in the Marriott, I looked at who opened the door. It was an Afro-Peruvian. And that's quite common in a lot of the high-end restaurants or hotels. So that struck me. And then I remember being at the event and people who were serving looked like me, and people who, and it was just an interesting dynamic. So I was like, oh, this is more extreme for me. And again, because I have a very US construct of the world. But I think racism does exist. We may just call it a different word. I think there is a term that I didn't know existed, but I learned, called colorism. So you can identify in the same group, right? You can be the same race or the same ethnic group and have preference for someone or have a prejudice towards someone because they're a different skin color, right? So you and I clearly could definitely both be Peruvians, but maybe in the way I'm perceived might be a little differently. So I think colorism, that's the word I'll use, is very prevalent. You even hear it in apodos or nicknames, right? Negrita, Chinito. I remember being young, and my dad still would get some of the Peruvian papers in the States, and it was like Chino something. They were talking about Fujimori, and I remember I was little, and I go, because my grandma's actually a Chinese Peruana, and I'm like, Dad, but we're Chinitos, like. He's not Chino. Like as a kid, like I understood that concept. And then my dad was explaining this, and it was just really eye-opening because it very much exists. I think the US talks about it. It's very out there right now. I think in Latin America, and many people may disagree with me, it is very, it's subtle. It's a very subtle thing that is interwoven into the system. Into the system and how people day to day talk. So if you, for instance, there's a show that my dad once by accident like flipped through about someone who wears colors their face in black in Peru, right? That would never happen in the United States, right?
Well,
Colors
not
their face
anymore.
in black, right? I think that show is off. It's called the Negro Mama, and it's one of the most racist things I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think I've heard about it.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that is on national television. National, not cable, national television, right? And if we don't really understand that what are you saying to little kids that look like that? Like it's not, and it's a person that actually isn't lighter skinned. So it is a very deep internalized thing of that exist in the region. Like I'll have friends also who are Dominican, and they're like, oh, stay out of the sun. Like there is this almost self-hatred too that exists of like my nose, like, oh, your nose is like, oh, what if you got a nose job? Like I had those conversations even with my own family, right? So I think it's very internalized. And I think, having us have this platform to openly talk about it is important because they're conversations that should happen. And I will say one last thing, Megan, a story that really impacted me on why I feel so strongly that colorism, racism does exist. It just may be called different things, right? Mm-hmm. I had a classmate that went to school with me. We went to the same MBA program. She went to San Marcos. I think she was the first person from San Marcos to go to Wharton. She took a very senior role at I'm not going to say, I was like, Peru is Lima small, at a company. And she was really excited about it. She had worked in the States, but pretty much, grew up entirely in Peru, working class family. She was also the first in our family to graduate college and put her other siblings through school. So she was in this job, but she was also very light-skinned. And the person who was her manager wanted to hire a new analyst. So they went through this whole process and they had 2 analysts. And my friend was really excited about this one analyst. She was Peruvian from Chincha. She was a Black Peruvian. And she went to Uni. She literally, went from Chincha to Lima to do whatever it was and made it to that final interview. And my friend was like, wow, think about all the steps that this woman had to do to get there. When they were going through the evaluation process, her manager said, well, in comparison to the other student, she doesn't have good internships. Maybe, the other person is the right one. And my friend said, oh, you know what? In San Marcos, before I went to Wharton, I didn't have good internships. So she dismissed that. So, okay. Then her manager said, well, her English isn't that good. And then my friend said, oh, you know what? I spoke very little English right before I went to Wharton, but I got a tutor. We can get her a tutor. Don't worry about it. Then his pushback was like, well, you know what? I don't know if she's going to feel comfortable, because to my friend, we hang out and we go to the club together. And my friend said, I don't go to the club. She's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm like her. He was like, no. And she kept saying all these things again and again. And he eventually chose the person, right? My friend said they were both equally qualified. My friend said actually the woman from Uni was probably better qualified to do the job because she would be the direct manager. But you chose the person who went to the club, who had a close relationship with the manager. And that's when my friend was like, the structure is screwed up. Because that person now who's my manager will be running a company, will set the culture of who gets hired. Why did she not get hired? She's done everything right to get to where she is. And it made me so mad. And I was like, that happens every day in Latin America. We just don't talk about it.
It does.
So that is the underlying, right? Because out of everything my friend said, she was able to dismiss everything because she's like, I had that problem. And it was interesting because her manager assumed that she was of a social class that she wasn't. Right? Mm-hmm. So my friend said, this is race. And let's just be very honest about it. So my friend quit the job, which I'm really proud of. But
wow.
Yeah, she has privilege to quit the job, right? To find another one. Yes, but it made her really angry. And then she's like, listen, we have our privilege. Let's help this young woman get a job. So.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a very powerful story.
Yeah.
And very good, like a sadly good illustration of the challenges that we face in the ecosystem. So I know that we're coming up on, we only have a few minutes left. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And basically, I'm going to sort of throw like a little bit of two sort of questions at you at once. On the one hand, what role, you've, as we talked about, you've been an entrepreneur, you've been an investor, you've been an LP. So what role do you think that those actors, and you can choose to just focus on one, maybe LP or investor, but what role do you think that each actor can play in creating a more equitable, diverse, inclusive ecosystem? And maybe inside of that is also this question of some of the creative ways that we're seeing people challenging the status quo right now to create that space for participation from those who have been historically marginalized from these spaces. So that's a big one.
I'll try to tackle it quickly. Yeah. So I'll go very quickly on the investing side. When you're hiring for new talent, hire people outside of your network, right? Like I just shared an example, like this person felt I can only hire people who went to my high school, who go to the same country club as me and beach XYZ, right? And have a house in the country here. The reality is talent and genius exists everywhere. And if I am a really great investor, I'm trying to find the best talent, and likely the best talent isn't just in my circle of network. It's not. It's going outside of that. So if anytime you're looking at the slate of your analysts or associates or partners, and everyone has the same profile, then you're not doing a good job. Take a step back and put out or network with other people to ensure that you have the best talent base and restart the process. So I think that's one thing. Create opportunities for internships so people can get exposed. The reality is, I will tell you myself, I took free internships, but had to work to pay for my free internship, right? It's a luxury to take a free internship. Pay your interns, but make the jobs openly available and not just secretly traded. So I think that's on the building the pipeline. Here in the United States, partner roles now are announced publicly. That was never done in the past, but if you really want to be inclusive, the roles should be public. On the LP side, on investing in funds, one of the things, again, on the structural issue, when you look at who makes the least amount of money, it's often women and compared to men, right? And then it's women who come from certain minority groups who actually make the least. In the United States, I think it's Latinas that make 52 cents on the dollar, like the least out of any, in comparison to a white man.
Yeah, I think it's Latinas and Native women as well.
And Native women, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And what you need to learn from that is there is a wealth gap. So think if you're starting a fund and you're not starting at the same line in the race. Like you're starting 20 meters ahead of me and I'm starting 20 meters behind. I'm trying to play catch up. So because of this wealth gap, if LPs are smart, one of the traditional LPs, they'll go through a checklist like, what percentage of the fund is this person going to pay as their GP commit? Be creative and say, you know, given that I understand that there are these structural issues, do I have a lower GP commit? Think about like little, it seems so basic, but I think people are so stuck in doing things the old way just because maybe the highest performing funds out of the gate started with a $20 million fund is not realistic to say, and many people will probably not agree with me. Maybe it's starting as a solo fund manager and starting a $5 million fund and prototyping it. And I think there are more creative LPs, especially now in the US, I hope that exists in other parts of Latin America, that are thinking about this and saying, wow, like the system is set up, the structure is not set up correctly. How can I be a better LP and identify talent that has access to networks that are going to make me a lot of money that I wouldn't have? So what am I doing as I'm evaluating companies? So I think new LPs, first close partners, by the way, Ed Zimmerman and a bunch of folks, they're doing stuff like that.
Yeah, and we have Ed on a panel later today.
Oh, so. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Carolina. I think probably we could keep going for another half hour. But in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap us there. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I hope we can do it again.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much, Meghan. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Carolina. And for those of you who have been with us this morning, thank you so much. Investors, we are going to give you about a 10-minute break before we go into our unconscious bias workshop. So we'll see you on the top of the hour. And for those of you who will be joining us again in the afternoon, we'll see you at 3 p.m. For our panel with, I believe we're starting off with investors, VCs. So we'll have a panel with Shun Yada from SoftBank, Cheryl Campos, another Peruvian American from Republic, and also Scout at Lightspeed, Mac Conwell, Rare Breed Ventures, and Luana Osamela from Dima Consulting. So thank you so much again, Carolina, and we'll see you all in a few minutes or this afternoon.